everyone, welcome back. We are returning to the Hobbit room as it currently stands today because I have several more kind of furnishings and decorations that I want to add to it. If you haven't seen part 1 of the room build, I'm going to link it down in the description box. But since we ended off that video making a start on the bedding, I want to continue on that thread because this Pinterest image has been living in my head rent-free for like months now, and I really want to try and bring it to life in miniature so that we can bring in a bit more kind of foresty coziness to the room. Obviously, one of the main components in that image is this sort of green, fluffy blanket bedspread type thing. And obviously, the easiest thing to do would be to go and buy some fluffy green fabric to use to make that. However, as I'm sure you all know by now, say it with me, I'm a cheapskate. So instead, I'm going to use some of this dark green yarn to try and crochet myself a blanket. Hopefully this will be enough. I did get this from a charity shop for like 20 pence, so I don't have a full skein, but fingers crossed it'll work. Now, I am not especially good at crochet. However, I have been slowly teaching myself the various stitches. And one of them is a loop stitch, which I originally learned because I thought it could be useful for making dollhouse rugs. But I'm hoping it will work in this context as well. I have crocheted until I've run out of yarn, and the next thing to do is go in and cut all the little loops we've just made, which is a little scary, but I've been assured that I can do this without it all falling apart, so we're gonna go for it. So I do think I could potentially stop here. It does definitely have a grassy kind of look to it. However, I do really want it to be a bit more fluffy, like the picture. So I'm going to kind of do the same thing that I do when making yarn hair for my doll reroots and brush out all the little yarn strands. And we are left with a soft, fluffy kind of blanket. Obviously, the colour and texture is a bit different from the inspo, but I think for working with what we had, it turned out pretty close. The next thing to do is make the cushions, and in the reference picture, we have a couple of different leaves and a mushroom. So I'm just drawing a few little leaf designs out on some paper. I do also have a mushroom and an acorn. Then I'll just cut them out, trace 2 of each shape onto some fabric, cut them out, leaving some seam allowance around the edge. Place the 2 matching ones together, good side to good side, and then backstitch all the way around. Leaving a little opening on one side so that I can flip the cushion right side out, add in a little bit of stuffing before sewing that last little gap closed using the ladder stitch. I'm also using a contrasting shade of green thread to embroider on some details to make it look a little bit more leafy. Once all of my little cushions are sewn and embroidered, I can arrange them on the bed. And we have ourselves a much cozier, much more forest-themed bed. The next thing I really want to make for the room is a rug, and my plan for the type of rug is to try and needle felt a moss rug. If you haven't seen these, I'll insert some pictures, and as you can see, I think they will fit really nicely with the nature theme we've got going on. For the base of the rug, I have this sheet of something. I don't know what you'd call this, but it's some kind of packaging material that I'm going to recycle. The texture is almost like packing peanuts, except really thin and flat. So hopefully I can cut it into a good moss rug shape and needle felt directly into it. For the actual felting, I do have some leftover yarn fluff from brushing out our blanket. Plus, I have dabbled a little bit in needle felting before, so I also have some other green and brown shades that I can work with. I also have this really densely packed brush, which is actually what I used to brush out the blanket earlier, but anyway, it's actually for felting into so that the needle doesn't go into the table and snap off or anything like that. I've cut a piece of the packaging, but I think it'll probably be better to cut out the actual shape after I've felted into it so that I don't risk kind of tearing up the edges. And the good part about it being a moss rug is I can just kind of guesstimate my way through this process, just adding in the different fiber colours, trying to keep it pretty random and natural looking. Once I have plenty felted on, I'm going to pull it off of the brush, and as you can see, it kind of leaves the underside nice and fluffy. I have left some little gaps between my felted colours because I want to glue on some of these mini pom-poms to add a bit of a different texture. I'm just going to add a little bit of tacky glue into the spaces and squish in my little pom-poms. I think I'm kind of realising that less is more where the pom-poms are concerned. I do wish I had some that weren't quite so brightly coloured, but I suppose a few won't hurt too much, and I might just go in and fill in the extra spaces with some more felting. Okay, I went in and ended up felting quite a bit more and brushing it a little bit to make it a bit fluffier again. And I'm not 100% happy with it. I am quite disappointed that the pom-poms didn't work in the way I wanted them to. But I'm just going to set it at the end of the bed. Maybe that way round. See, now I'm wondering if I've made it a little bit small. It's about the length I had planned, but maybe it could do with being a little bit wider. Okay, I wound up going back and adding a little bit more width to the rug, and I'm still not totally satisfied with it, but I can't really place why exactly, so I'm just going to hope that it's because I've been looking at it too long and move on for now. The next thing I want to do is make some shelves for this wall. But not just any shelves, however. I want to sculpt them to look like shelf mushrooms. You know, like the kind you see growing out of the side of a tree trunk? My plan is to use some of this super light air dry clay, which I've never really used before. However, I have been told that it dries into like a foam, basically. So I think that might make it the perfect thing to use for this, since I don't want to add much extra weight. Oh wow, that is such an interesting texture. That's so strange. It leaves no residue on your hands at all. Okay, this is pretty cool. So I guess I'll just dive in. I'll insert some reference pictures for what I'm going to try and sculpt here. It genuinely does feel like sculpting with a cloud. It's the weirdest thing. But I may have stumbled upon like the best medium for sculpting shelf mushrooms, because why did that take shape so quickly? And I can make the edges so thin as well. I'm also going to just lightly use my nail to add some little rings into the top. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but I'm pretty sure I've seen this in some mushrooms. This feels very weird because that was so quick, but I think we might be done with our first mushroom. Like, it feels unfinished, but only because of how fast that was. I am not used to things being that quick. I guess I'll just leave him somewhere to dry and speed through making a few more. After 24 hours, when I'm fairly sure that my mushrooms are all dry, it's a little bit hard to tell because obviously they do dry spongy still, but they aren't sticky or anything, so I'm going to go ahead and paint them. I've got a palette of mushroomy looking colours here, and I guess I'm just going to kind of go for it. I can't say I've ever painted a shelf mushroom before, but here we go. Once all my little mushrooms have dried, I of course need to mount them on the wall. For this, I'm going to be using some little pieces of wire and pushing them into the foam board of the wall. I'm going to use 3 pins for each mushroom just to help keep it extra stable. And since our mushrooms are foam, I can just push the wires into the back and it's held in place. We will be dressing the shelves later in the video, but before I get onto that, I want to finish the last big project for the room, which is a canopy for the bed. For this, I've found 2 sticks that are about the same length as the bed, as well as this bag of fake leaves I found at the craft store. My plan is to hot glue the leaves onto my sticks, overlapping them and adding them together to create basically a sheet that will extend between the 2 sticks, and leaving a space at either end of the sticks that I can tie some twine around and hang them from the ceiling. I have several different leaf colours and I'm just going to, I guess, try and place them as artistically as possible. Now that my sheet of leaves is all glued together, I'm going to tie my twine on. I also really want to add another strip of these thin copper fairy lights. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to attach them, but I guess I'll just find a way to kind of wind them around the sticks in between where the leaves are glued. Now I'm going to hang it from the ceiling. As I did before, I'm going to hide the remaining length of cable leading to the battery pack by slipping it down behind the foam board wall insert. Now that that is in place, I'm going to turn off my ring light and turn on both sets of fairy lights. And we have ourselves an extra cozy little bedroom. The next thing I want to do is fill up some of these shelves. So I have printed out some book covers. As you can see, I tried to bring back in the Tolkien references. And of course, you can't have Tolkien without some C.S. Lewis. So I'm going to cut each of these out. Sorry for how loud the rain is, by the way. Hopefully you can still hear me okay. But now that all my book covers have been cut out, I've also cut out some little rectangles of foam board in different sizes. And I'm going to glue the front and back of them and then wrap each of my little book covers around them to make our tiny books. Now I just need to repeat for all of these. Once my books are all done, I can start arranging them on my shelves. They are all in now, but obviously I do still have some empty spaces, which I'm going to try and fill in with some little ornaments I've found. I also went through my collection of doll clothes and picked out a few conceivably hobbitish ones, which I can hang up in the other side of the wardrobe on this little spinny necklace holder thing. I also found this pair of Ever After High boots. I think they were from Hunter Huntsman, and I'm just going to put them in the bottom. And you can't really see much of that when I close the door, but, you know, if you're looking closely, it does add a little bit of extra realism. As for the mushroom shelves, I had originally planned to put some books on those too. However, when I tried it, it just kind of obscured the fact that they were mushrooms a little bit too much. So I'm just going to default to adding some ornaments and clutter here as well. This has turned out a little random, but I think I'm just going to have to say that our Hobbit has eclectic taste and move on. I feel as though I need to add something in this corner. My plan for this is to make a little framed map of Middle-earth like you often find in the books. So I printed one off the internet and I'm just going to cut that out. And then gluing it to a piece of scrap card and framing it in with some strips of dark brown card. The dark brown card is looking a little bit too kind of inky, so I'm going to try and do the same thing I did with the window surround and use some coloured pencils to kind of add a wood grain to it. I'm also going to use a gold pen to try and add some little decorative gold corners and then cut the whole thing out. And now we have our little framed map. The wood grain is barely visible on camera, but I think it's just enough to make it look a little bit less flat. I'm attaching both ends of a piece of embroidery thread to the back. And then I'm going to hang it by pushing this tiny split pin into the foam wall. And just looping the embroidery thread over the top. I really like how that looks. However, now this side seems a little bit bare, so I think I'm going to try and add a plant back there. I asked my mum to pick up some of these little fake plants last time she went up to IKEA, and they are in these little white pots. So I think they could work quite nicely as floor plants in the doll's house. However, the very stark white pot isn't exactly going to mesh well with the Hobbit room, so I'm going to paint it. I'm not going to worry about being super thorough with the coverage on the outside of my plant pot because I also plan on wrapping it with some more of that garden twine I used earlier. So I'm just going to add a thin layer of glue and start wrapping. And now I can put my fully wrapped plant pot in the back corner. While I'm here, I feel like I want to replace the blanket on top of the chest with this folded pair of doll trousers, just because I think they fit the colour scheme a little bit better. I also thought it would be fun to leave some evidence of a second breakfast, as the hobbits are famous for having. So I've just arranged these little vintage ceramic cups and plate on a miniature tray. These are from my childhood doll's house, which was like Victorian themed. So they're a bit more kind of whimsical, which seemed like it would fit the vibe best. I also need to add some things onto the nightstand. I had originally wanted to make a little lantern to go on here. However, I am running a little bit low on time, so I'm just going to keep it simple and try to make like a vintage looking candlestick holder. If you don't know what I mean by that, here are some pictures. For my supplies, I have this little silver dollhouse plate, a birthday candle holder, and a butterfly earring back. The first thing I need to do is paint the candle holder silver to match the rest. Then, while I wait for that to dry, I'm going to use some needle nose pliers to unravel one of the loops on our earring back. Try to flatten it out as much as I can. And I know this seems a little silly for something so small, but I'm going to hot glue the earring back to the underside of my dish because I need it to dry quite rapidly. Once the candle holder has dried, I'm going to snip off the little stem that you would poke into a cake, and then sand the base flat, glue it into the center of my little dish. And I am just now realizing how different those shades of silver are, so I'm going to go ahead and paint it all the same color to match. Now that we have our holder finished, I have a birthday candle, which I'm going to cut quite a bit shorter. Then I can just add it into the holder. And the last thing I'm going to do is slip this little wire ring over the top of the candle, and when it rests on the edge of the holder, it looks like a little decorative lip. And then I can just set it on the nightstand, and our hobbit has a nice little candle to take to bed. Now, I have one more thing to add, and thankfully I don't have to try and make this one, because I saw one of these little collectible miniature clocks on Vinted for £2, and it is functional, but unfortunately I don't have a watch battery in the right size for it. However, I think it will be the perfect finishing touch to go on our bedside table. I do think it might be a tiny bit overscaled. However, the benefit of working in a fantasy world is I can just say he got it as a gift from a wizard or something. But with that being said, our hobbit room is finally finished. Thank you so much for watching. I very much hope you enjoyed. If you did, I would very much appreciate a like and maybe even a subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!